The desert night seemed to breathe around them. 6 men pinned down behind the shattered remnants of a Stonewall rifle, fire cracking overhead like angry whips. Dust and debris rained with each impact. Afghanistan 2019, Kandahar Province. SEAL Team 8's extraction had gone catastrophically wrong. The helicopter was nowhere in sight. Radio communications jammed. They were alone, surrounded, and running low on ammunition. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reynolds pressed his back against the crumbling wall, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder, his face a mask of controlled fear. 2 of his men were already down. The rest wouldn't last another 20 minutes at this rate. "Command, this is Wolfpack. We are taking heavy fire request, immediate extraction," he shouted into his radio for the 12th time. Nothing but static answered him. "We're cut off, Chief," Lieutenant Harris growled, ejecting a spent magazine and slapping in his last full one. "They're jamming all frequencies." Reynolds closed his eyes briefly. This was it. After 3 tours, countless missions, all the friends he'd buried, this forgotten patch of Afghan dirt would be his final resting place. A burst of gunfire tore through the air above them, forcing them lower. Then, impossibly, the static in their comms units cleared. "Wolfpack, this is Phantom," a woman's voice calm and precise. "I have your position. Multiple hostiles converging from the northeast ridge. Adjust fire 20 degrees west." The men exchanged confused glances. "Who the hell is Phantom?" Harris whispered. Reynolds hesitated only a second before making his decision. "Wolfpack copies Phantom. Adjusting fire." On the mysterious voice's guidance, the team shifted their defensive position. Seconds later, insurgents appeared exactly where predicted, walking straight into their line of fire. "Incoming technical vehicle approaching from the South Access Road," the voice continued. "3 occupants, heavy weapons. Your extraction is inbound, ETA 4 minutes. There's a ravine 40 meters to your west. I'll cover your movement." As if to confirm her words, precision sniper fire suddenly rained down on the insurgent positions from a completely different angle. "Move now," Reynolds ordered. The team half-dragged their wounded through the darkness toward the ravine. Phantom's voice guided them every step of the way, calling out enemy positions with supernatural accuracy, directing their fire, keeping them alive when they should have been dead. By the time the extraction helicopter arrived, the mysterious guardian angel had saved their lives a dozen times over. Reynolds looked up at the dark ridgeline as he boarded the helicopter, wondering who or what Phantom really was. "Phantom, this is Wolfpack Actual," he said into his radio. "I don't know who you are or how you found us, but my men are alive because of you." A brief pause, then, "Just doing my job, Chief. Safe travels home." And the helicopter lifted off, carrying the battered SEAL team away from certain death. Not one of them would ever forget the voice that had saved them from the darkness. 6 years later, Fort Poseidon Naval Joint Operations Base, California. 2020, the morning sun glinted off the Pacific Ocean, casting the sprawling military facility in golden light. Personnel moved with purpose across the base. Sailors in their crisp uniforms, Marines with their distinctive bearing, intelligence officers hiding in plain sight among them. Lieutenant Commander Elena Reyes stood motionless at the security checkpoint, her service record displayed on the guard's monitor. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, her expression giving away nothing. At 5'4", she was easily the shortest officer in sight, her frame slight compared to the burly Marines passing through. "Specialist in cryptologic warfare and signals intelligence," the guard read aloud, eyebrows lifting slightly as he continued scanning her file. "SEAL qualification. That's unusual, ma'am." Elena said nothing, just waited. She had long ago stopped explaining herself to people who underestimated her based on her appearance. The guard's eyes widened as he reached a classified section's security clearances beyond his own pay grade. He cleared his throat nervously. "Commander Bennett is expecting you, ma'am. Building 7 Secure Operations Center. I'll have someone escort you." "That won't be necessary." Elena's voice was measured calm. "I know where it is." She collected her credentials and made her way across the base. Her eyes cataloged every detail: security camera positions, patrol patterns, blind spots, and coverage. Old habits from years of training. Building 7 loomed ahead, a nondescript concrete structure with minimal windows and multiple security layers. The heart of intelligence operations for the North Pacific Fleet. Inside, Commander Michael Bennett waited in a glass-walled conference room. He was in his mid-40s with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen combat and the careful posture of a man who now fought wars from behind computer screens. "Commander Reyes," Bennett said, standing as she entered. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." She nodded once, placing her secure tablet on the table. "The briefing mentioned Operation Northern Guardian. I assume we're discussing the Belgorod situation." Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've already been briefed. I make it my business to stay informed about Russian submarine movements," Elena replied, "especially when they involve nuclear-powered vessels with potential doomsday capabilities." A slight smile crossed Bennett's face. "They said you were thorough." He activated the room's security protocols, polarizing the glass walls to opacity. "What they didn't mention is that you're Phantom." Elena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "That's still classified, Commander." "Not to everyone." A new voice entered the conversation as the door opened. The man who stepped through was a living piece of military history, nearly 70 with a weathered face that had seen decades of service but still carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of a SEAL. Master Chief Franklin Wilson had silver hair cut in the same military style he'd worn since the Reagan administration. Elena straightened almost imperceptibly. "Master Chief." Wilson studied her with eyes that had seen combat on 4 continents. "Been a while, Reyes. Afghanistan wasn't it, that mess outside Kandahar?" "Yes, sir," Reynolds and his team. Wilson nodded. "And 6 men who should have come home in body bags. Instead, they walked away because of you." He turned to Bennett. "She's the real deal. If anyone can crack the Russian communication systems, it's her." Bennett gestured for them to sit. "Then let's get started. 3 weeks ago, our underwater acoustic arrays detected the Belgorod leaving its berth at Severomorsk. It's Russia's newest and most advanced submarine carrying nuclear-powered long-range torpedoes. And now it's headed toward the Bering Strait." Elena's mind was already racing ahead. "They're testing our northern defenses, looking for gaps in our detection grid." "Exactly," Bennett confirmed, "and we need to know what they're saying to each other. Their new encryption protocols have been giving our analysts headaches." Wilson leaned forward. "Which is why you're here. We need your system installed and operational within 2 weeks." The door opened again and a young lieutenant entered with a stack of files. "Sir, the team from MARSOC is here for the joint briefing." Bennett nodded. "Send them in." 4 Marines in combat utilities filed into the room, led by a tall, broad-shouldered man with the weathered face of a career soldier. Gunnery Sergeant Jackson Drake walked with the swagger of someone used to commanding physical respect. His eyes swept the room briefly, dismissing Elena, before focusing on Bennett and Wilson. "Commander, Master Chief." Drake nodded. "My team is ready for the briefing." Wilson made the introductions. "Gunnery Sergeant Drake, this is Lieutenant Commander Reyes. She'll be heading up the signals intelligence portion of Operation Northern Guardian." Drake's eyes slid back to Elena, a barely concealed flicker of skepticism crossing his features as he took in her slight frame. "Signals intelligence? You mean she'll be manning the radios while we do the real work?" The room temperatures seemed to drop several degrees. Bennett cleared his throat uncomfortably. Wilson's voice remained even, but took on a dangerous edge. "Lieutenant Commander Reyes is a qualified naval special warfare operator with multiple combat deployments. She'll be integrating a next-generation signals intelligence platform that will be critical to mission success." Drake's expression made it clear he wasn't convinced. "No disrespect, ma'am, but Northern Guardian may require direct action. If we have to board that submarine, if you have to board that submarine, Gunnery Sergeant," Elena interrupted calmly, "you'll need to know exactly where to go, what to look for, and how to bypass their security systems. That's what my team provides." The Marine's jaw tightened. Before he could respond, Bennett intervened, pulling up mission schematics on the room's display. "Let's focus on the operation. Reyes, walk us through the SIGINT approach." For the next hour, Elena outlined her plan to intercept, decode, and analyze the Russian submarine's communications. Her presentation was flawless, technically precise, delivered with the confidence of someone who had done this before under much worse conditions. Throughout, Drake and his men exchanged subtle glances, their skepticism barely concealed. When the briefing concluded, Bennett assigned workspace and billets. "Commander Reyes will need full access to the skiff and communications center. Her equipment arrives tomorrow." Drake gathered his files. "We'll be running combat drills on the East Range. Commander, he nodded at Bennett, deliberately ignoring Elena as he led his team out. When the Marines had gone, Wilson shook his head. Drake's one of the best in force recon, 20 years in multiple combat tours, but he's old school. I've dealt with his type before, Elena replied evenly. Bennett looked concerned. We need both teams working together seamlessly. They will, Elena assured him, once they understand what's at stake. As they left the conference room, Wilson fell into step beside her. You know, I heard about you long before Afghanistan. That business in Syria with the Russian mercenaries. Very impressive. Elena glanced at him surprised. That operation was highly classified. Wilson smiled. I still have a few friends in high places. The point is, Drake and his men don't know who you really are. Might be worth keeping it that way for now. Why? The old warrior's eyes twinkled with something between mischief and wisdom. Sometimes it's advantageous to be underestimated. Word traveled fast on military bases. By evening mess, the whispers had already spread through Fort Poseidon. A female SEAL had arrived for a classified operation. Elena felt the stares as she entered the dining facility. Conversations dimmed momentarily before resuming at a slightly higher volume. She collected her tray and found an empty table near the back, spreading her tablet to review communication protocols while she ate. At a table across the room, Drake sat with his team. Corporals Martinez and Miller hung on his every word, laughing too loudly at his jokes, mimicking his dismissive gestures. SEAL qualification, Drake said loud enough to carry. What's next, ballet dancers in Delta Force? Miller snickered. I heard they're lowering all the standards these days. Political correctness gone wild. Martinez leaned in. $10 says she's never seen that actual combat, probably pushing papers in Bahrain while real operators were getting shot at. Drake took a long drink from his water bottle, eyes fixed on Elena's back. Navy's trying too hard to make some kind of statement. In my day, special operations was about the best person for the job, not checking diversity boxes. Several tables away, Master Chief Wilson entered the mess hall. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone. Collecting his tray, he noticed Drake's table, then Elena sitting alone. His eyes narrowed slightly as he registered the dynamics at play. Wilson set his tray down opposite Elena. Mind if I join you, Commander? She glanced up, nodding once. How's the equipment installation coming? He asked, cutting into his meal. The first components arrived this afternoon. We should be operational within 72 hours. Wilson nodded, then lowered his voice. They're watching you, you know, waiting for you to fail. Elena didn't look up from her tablet. They'll be waiting a long time. The old warrior smiled faintly. You know, you remind me of someone I served with during the Cold War. Lieutenant Sharon Hayes, Naval Intelligence. Spoke 4 languages, could crack Soviet codes faster than our best computers. This caught Elena's attention. She looked up. What happened to her? Saved our entire task force in the Barents Sea operation in '86. Intercepted Soviet attack orders 30 minutes before they launched. No one thought a woman could handle the pressure of that posting. She proved them all wrong. Wilson's eyes took on a distant look. Back then, women like her never got the recognition they deserved. Their contributions stayed in the shadows. Drake's voice carried across the mess hall again. I bet she's never even fired an MP5, let alone jumped from a high-altitude aircraft. Martinez and Miller laughed on cue. Elena remained focused on her tablet, seemingly oblivious to the taunts. Wilson watched her with growing respect. Most officers would have confronted the insubordination directly. Her restraint suggested something else, a deeper game. You're not what they're expecting, Wilson observed quietly. That's their problem, not mine, Elena replied. Wilson leaned closer. You know, Bennett brought me onto this operation specifically because of my experience with the Russians. I ran counterintelligence against the KGB for nearly a decade. I know, Elena said. Your work during the Cold War is required reading at the Naval Academy now. This surprised him. Is it? Well, I'll be damned. He smiled briefly before turning serious again. The point is, what we're seeing with the Belgorod isn't new. It's old tactics in a new uniform. The Russians never really abandoned their Cold War playbook. Elena nodded. The submarines' movement patterns match historical Soviet deployment strategies. They're probing for weaknesses, testing response times. Exactly. And Wilson's words were cut short as Drake and his team approached their table. The Marine loomed over them, his presence deliberately intimidating. Martinez and Miller flanked him, smirking. Master Chief, Drake nodded respectfully to Wilson. Didn't expect to see you slumming with the support staff. Wilson's face hardened, but before he could respond, Drake continued, addressing Elena directly. Commander Bennett mentioned you'd be running some kind of new signals program. Hope it's user-friendly. My men actually need to focus on combat readiness, not computer classes. Elena looked up at him, her gaze level. The system is designed to be operated by intelligence specialists, gunnery sergeant. Your team won't need to concern themselves with it. Drake's smile didn't reach his eyes. Right. You'll handle the technical stuff while real operators handle the mission. Got it. Wilson started to rise, but Elena subtly shook her head. We all have our specialties, gunnery sergeant, she said calmly. Mine happens to be identifying threats others can't see. Something in her tone made Drake pause. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. Then he recovered, leaning down so his massive frame loomed over her. Well, if you identify any threats in the mess hall, be sure to let us know. He deliberately bumped her table, causing her water glass to topple. The liquid spilled across her tablet. Elena didn't flinch, didn't react beyond calmly lifting her device away from the spreading puddle. Her eyes never left Drake's, her expression unchanged. The Marine straightened, disappointed by her lack of response. Oops, accidents happen. He turned to leave Martinez and Miller in tow, all three chuckling. Wilson watched them go, his face dark with anger. That was deliberate insubordination. You should report him. Elena calmly dried her tablet with a napkin. Not yet. Why the hell not? She glanced around the mess hall, noting the security cameras in the corners, then looked back at Wilson. Because this isn't the first time I've dealt with someone like Drake. And I've learned that men like him eventually give you everything you need to hang them with their own rope. Wilson studied her face, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're documenting a pattern. She nodded once, returning to her meal as if nothing had happened. Smart, Wilson admitted, but be careful. Drake has a reputation for escalating when challenged. I'm counting on it. The Secure Compartmented Information Facility, SCIF, was a room within a room designed to prevent any electronic signals from entering or escaping. Inside this electronic fortress, Elena had spent the past 48 hours installing her specialized equipment. Banks of monitors displayed scrolling data, frequency analyses, and signal patterns. Commander Bennett entered after clearing the multiple security protocols. He whistled softly at the transformation of the space. Impressive setup, Commander. Elena nodded from where she sat, fingers flying across 3 separate keyboards. We're nearly operational. Final calibrations in progress. Bennett moved closer, studying one of the displays. Is that Russian naval communication protocols? Yes, I've been analyzing their patterns for the past 6 months. She pulled up another screen showing a map of the Arctic Circle with various signal sources highlighted. The Belgorod has been using a modified version of their traditional communication protocols, but with an interesting variation. She zoomed in on a particular signal pattern. This sequence here, it's reminiscent of old KGB transmission methods from the Cold War. They're embedding secondary messages within routine communications. Bennett frowned. What kind of messages? That's what I'm trying to determine. They're using a layered encryption approach I haven't seen before. She paused. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. I've seen something similar, but it was in historical records from Soviet submarine operations in the 1980s. The door to the skiff opened again and Master Chief Wilson entered, followed by Drake and his team. The Marines looked uncomfortable in the high-tech environment, like bulls in a china shop. You called for a tactical briefing, Wilson asked. Elena nodded, standing to address the group. We've detected significant changes in the Belgorod's movement patterns. It's no longer on a direct course for the Bering Strait. It's making a series of irregular maneuvers consistent with weapons testing protocols. She brought up a 3D model of the Arctic seafloor. Based on its current position and depth, I believe they're preparing to test something in this underwater canyon. The topography would contain and mask certain types of explosions or energy discharges. Drake crossed his arms. And you determined all this from radio chatter? From multiple data sources, Elena corrected him. Acoustic signatures, thermal variations, communication patterns, satellite imagery. Intelligence isn't just about listening to conversations, Gunnery Sergeant. It's about assembling a complete picture from fragmented data. Bennett studied the display. What kind of weapon are we talking about? Elena hesitated. The data suggests they're testing an upgraded Poseidon torpedo, nuclear-powered, potentially carrying a cobalt warhead. A heavy silence fell over the room. The Poseidon was Russia's so-called doomsday weapon, a nuclear-powered torpedo designed to create radioactive tsunamis that could devastate coastal cities. Christ, Martinez whispered. Wilson leaned forward, eyes fixed on the display. Are you certain the signatures match what we know about the Poseidon system? Elena confirmed. But there's something else. She pulled up a frequency analysis. These communication patterns contain embedded signals using an old Soviet cipher system, one that was primarily used by their intelligence services, not their Navy. Wilson's eyes narrowed. The KGB's Winter Protocol. Elena looked at him surprised. Yes, how did you? I encountered it during an operation in the Barents Sea in 1986, Wilson explained. Soviet Northern Fleet was testing a new class of submarine. We were tracking them when they suddenly went silent. 3 days later, they surfaced and sank one of our listening posts, disguised as an oil platform. 27 men died. He moved closer to the display. We later discovered they were using the Winter Protocol to communicate. Naval transmissions with KGB instructions embedded within them. Nearly impossible to detect unless you knew exactly what to look for. Drake shifted uncomfortably. So what are you saying? The Russian intelligence services are running this operation, not their Navy? It wouldn't be unprecedented, Wilson said. During the Cold War, the KGB often had operational control of strategic assets, especially during testing phases. Elena nodded. Which means this isn't just a routine patrol or even a standard weapons test. Something bigger is happening. She turned to Bennett. Commander, I recommend we elevate the threat assessment and increase surveillance. Bennett considered this, then nodded. Agreed. Drake, your team needs to prepare for potential direct action. If this turns into something more than a surveillance, we'll need to be ready. Drake straightened. My men are always ready, sir. Good, Bennett replied, because if Commander Reyes is right, we may be dealing with something we haven't seen since the Cold War. As the briefing concluded, Drake lingered behind as the others filed out. He approached Elena as she returned to her workstation. Quite a theory you've developed, he said, voice low. Impressive if it's true. Elena continued working, not looking up. It's not a theory. It's an analysis based on factual data. Drake leaned against her console. You know, I've been doing this a long time. Seen all kinds of intelligence officers come and go. The ones who last are the ones who don't overreach, who don't see Russian boogeymen behind every unusual signal. Now Elena did look up, her gaze steady, and the operators who last, Gunnery Sergeant, are the ones who respect intelligence, even when it comes from sources they don't personally approve of. Drake's expression hardened. Just make sure your fancy computer systems don't send my men into a situation based on faulty analysis. Some of us can't hide behind monitors when things go wrong. He pushed off from the console and walked away. Wilson appeared in the doorway as Drake left, watching the Marines retreating back with a frown. He's becoming a problem, Wilson observed once Drake was out of earshot. Elena had already returned to her work. He's the least of our problems right now. Wilson moved closer, lowering his voice. There's something you should know about the Winter Protocol. In '86, we discovered it wasn't just used for covert communications. It was used specifically for assassinations and sabotage operations. This got Elena's full attention. You think that's what's happening now? I think, Wilson said carefully, that history has a way of repeating itself. The players change, the technology advances, but the game remains the same. He glanced at the displays showing the Russian submarine's position. We beat them last time because we had people who understood how they thought, people willing to go beyond conventional analysis. Elena nodded slowly. Like Lieutenant Hayes. Wilson's eyes crinkled slightly. Yes, exactly like Hayes. He paused. You know, she never got the recognition she deserved. Most people don't even know her name, but every man on that mission owed her their lives. What happened to her? Elena asked. She continued serving quietly, made commander before retiring. Last I heard, she was teaching at the Naval Academy. Wilson's eyes took on a distant look. The best ones often work in shadows, remembered only by those they saved. Elena turned back to her monitors. I need to recalibrate the acoustic sensors to look for specific signatures associated with the Poseidon system. Wilson nodded. I'll leave you to it, but Commander, she looked up. Watch yourself around Drake. Men like him, men who feel their world changing around them, they can be unpredictable. After Wilson left, Elena sat alone in the blue glow of the monitors. Her fingers moved automatically across the keyboards, but her mind was elsewhere processing multiple threads simultaneously. The Russian submarine, the Winter Protocol, Drake's escalating hostility, Wilson's warning. She pulled up the mess hall security footage from the previous day, watching as Drake deliberately spilled water on her tablet. Her expression in the video remained neutral, giving away nothing. She had learned long ago to compartmentalize, to separate emotion from action. In the silent skiff surrounded by the ghosts of communications from across the globe, Elena Reyes continued her work, patiently assembling the pieces of a puzzle that had begun decades before during a war that had never truly ended. The base fell quiet after midnight. Most personnel were asleep, preparing for another day of training and preparation. But deep within the sprawling facility in the Combat Dive Training Center, the pool glowed an eerie blue from underwater lights. Elena sliced through the water in perfect form, her movements efficient and economical. Lap after lap, she pushed herself, her mind clearing with each stroke. After an hour of continuous swimming, she moved to the deep end where dive equipment waited. She methodically checked each piece, regulator, tank buoyancy, compensator, before slipping into the gear. The weight belt settled around her waist, heavy with purpose. With practiced ease, she submerged, descending to the pool's 30-foot bottom. There in the pressurized silence, Elena found her center. The underwater world reduced everything to its essential elements: pressure, oxygen, time. No politics, no prejudice, no Drake. Just the fundamental laws of physics and the discipline to master them. She settled cross-legged on the pool floor, controlling her breathing through the regulator. Her heartbeat slowed. Her mind cleared. In this state of focused calm, memories surfaced, not as emotional burdens, but as objective lessons to be reviewed and integrated. Bud's training 7 years earlier. Hell Week, 83 candidates started. By day 3, only 37 remained. Elena was one of 3 women in the first class to allow female candidates. By the 3rd day, she was the only one left. The men around her were falling too, their bodies and spirits broken by relentless cold sleep, deprivation, and physical demands beyond normal human endurance. Instructors hovering like sharks, looking for any sign of weakness, any excuse to make a candidate ring the bell and quit. Reyes, you think you belong here. You think you can keep up with the men. An instructor screamed in her face, sand and spittle flying. She said nothing, conserved her energy, kept moving. Answer me, candidate. Yes, instructor, she replied, voice steady despite the exhaustion eating at her very cells. Yes, yes, then prove it. Drop and give me 50, then run into that surf and back 20 times. Move. She did it, and the next task, and the next. While stronger men broke around her, she endured. Not because she was physically superior, she wasn't, but because her mind had been forged in a different fire long before she arrived at Bud's. On the final night of Hell Week, an instructor found her helping a male candidate who was on the verge of hypothermia. Instead of punishing her, he simply watched as she shared her body heat, encouraging the man to continue. Rayan, the instructor said quietly when they were done, you know why most people quit. They can't take the pain, instructor. Wrong, they quit because they focus on themselves, their pain, their exhaustion, their suffering. He nodded toward the candidate she had helped. You're still here because you think beyond yourself. Remember that. It's what separates operators from everyone else. The memory dissolved as Elena sensed a presence. Opening her eyes underwater, she saw a figure at the pool's edge. Master Chief Wilson sat watching her, his expression thoughtful. Elena checked her dive computer. She'd been submerged for 27 minutes. She began her ascent, careful to pause for decompression, even though it wasn't strictly necessary at this depth. Discipline was a way of life, not something to be abandoned when convenient. When she surfaced and removed her regulator, Wilson handed her a towel. Combat breathing exercises, he asked. Elena nodded, climbing out of the pool. Helps me think. I used to do the same thing, Wilson admitted. Still do sometimes, though. These old lungs don't hold air like they used to. He studied her for a moment. You've picked up some interesting habits for a signals intelligence officer. SEAL training leaves an impression, she replied simply. Wilson nodded. That it does. He paused. I came looking for you because there's been a development. The Belgorod has changed course again. It's now heading directly for the underwater ridge near the Alaskan shelf. Elena toweled off her hair. That's international waters, but just barely. Yes, and it puts them within strike range of several key naval facilities. Wilson's expression grew serious. There's something else. Bennett intercepted communications between Drake and the base commander at Camp Pendleton. Drake's been making inquiries about you. Elena's expression remained neutral. What kind of inquiries? The kind that suggest he's looking for something to discredit you with. Your service record deployment history training evaluations. He won't find anything useful. Wilson smiled faintly. No, he won't. Your record is impressive but deliberately vague in the areas that matter most. Very little about your actual operations. Nothing about your role as Phantom. He paused. It's almost as if someone wanted to keep your true capabilities under wraps. Elena began packing up her dive gear. Some missions require discretion. Indeed they do. Wilson watched her methodical movements. You know Drake is the type of man who won't stop until he feels he's won. He sees you as a threat to his worldview. He sees me as a woman in what he considers a man's domain, Elena corrected. It's not complicated, Master Chief. I've dealt with his type before. Wilson shook his head. It's more than that. Drake was being considered for the operational lead on Northern Guardian. Then you arrived with your intelligence assessment, and Bennett shifted priorities from direct action to surveillance and signals intelligence. Elena paused. Drake thinks I took his mission. Essentially, yes. She resumed her work unfazed. His ego is not my concern. The Russian submarine is. Wilson smiled, precisely what Hayes would have said. He stood to leave. 0800 briefing tomorrow. Bennett wants an update on your signal analysis. When Wilson had gone, Elena finished storing her gear and headed for the showers. As the hot water washed away the chlorine, she reflected on Wilson's warning. Drake was becoming more than a nuisance. He was actively working to undermine her. She had faced worse. In Afghanistan, Syria, and a dozen classified operations, she had overcome greater obstacles than one resentful Marine. But something about this situation felt different. The coincidence of Drake's escalating hostility and the Russian submarine's unusual behavior triggered her well-honed instincts. As she dressed in her quarters later, Elena made two decisions. First, she would accelerate her analysis of the Russian communications, and second, she would begin documenting everything related to Drake. Not just his harassment, but his movements, his communications, his access to sensitive areas. Because in her experience, when things aligned too conveniently, it was rarely coincidence. And in the intelligence world, there was no such thing as paranoia, only varying levels of awareness. Morning sunlight streamed through the narrow windows of the operations center as Elena analyzed the latest intelligence reports. For 3 days, she had been tracking anomalous patterns in the Russian submarine's communications. Something wasn't adding up. The Belgorod was maintaining position near the Alaskan underwater ridge, occasionally changing depth, but never straying more than 5 nautical miles from its central location. Standard patrol behavior suggested continuous movement, not this stationary hovering. It's like they're waiting for something, she murmured to herself, eyes scanning frequency distributions. A notification flashed on her secure tablet. The base security system she had quietly tapped into showed Drake and his team entering the communications building. Their scheduled briefing wasn't for another hour. Elena quickly saved her work and locked her station. She had learned long ago to never leave sensitive information accessible, even in a supposedly secure facility. She was reviewing submarine acoustic signatures when Drake entered the skiff, Martinez and Miller trailing behind him. All three wore the smug expressions of men who believed they held the upper hand. Commander Reyes, Drake's voice carried a false note of professionalism. Hope we're not interrupting. Elena turned calmly. The briefing isn't until 0900 gunnery, Sergeant. We're aware, Drake replied, but we've been tasked with evaluating security protocols throughout the facility, standard procedure when dealing with high-level intelligence operations. It was a plausible lie, but Elena had spent years detecting deception. Drake's eyes showed too much satisfaction. Martinez kept glancing at her workstation, and Miller seemed unusually tense. I wasn't informed of any security evaluation, Elena said. Drake produced a tablet. Orders just came down this morning. If you'll allow us access to your systems, we can verify compliance and be on our way. Elena knew immediately what was happening. They were fishing for information, looking for something to undermine her position. The question was whether Drake was acting on his own initiative or under someone else's direction. I'm afraid that won't be possible without proper authorization, she replied. This system contains classified intelligence at levels beyond your clearance. Drake's smile tightened. Are you questioning my security credentials, Commander? I'm following protocol, Gunnery Sergeant. Please have Commander Bennett contact me directly if he wishes to authorize a security evaluation. The Marine's jaw tensed. He hadn't expected resistance. You realize obstructing a security review could be seen as suspicious activity. Elena met his gaze evenly. You realize falsifying authorization for access to classified systems is a federal offense. The atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken threat. Martinez shifted uncomfortably while Miller's hand twitched toward a pocket. The standoff was broken by Wilson's voice from the doorway. Is there a problem here? Drake recovered quickly. Just conducting a routine security evaluation, Master Chief. Wilson stepped into the room, his weathered face unreadable. Interesting. I just came from Commander Bennett's office, and he didn't mention any security evaluation. A flicker of unease crossed Drake's face. The orders came through this morning. I'd like to see those orders, Wilson said, extending his hand. Drake hesitated. They're in the system. I can forward them to you. Please do, Wilson replied. In the meantime, I believe you have preparatory exercises scheduled on the East Range. The dismissal was clear. Drake nodded stiffly. We'll continue this later. He turned to leave and his men following close behind. When they were gone, Wilson turned to Elena. They're getting bolder. Yes, she agreed, but why? What does Drake think he'll find? Wilson considered this. It may not be what he's looking for, but who he's looking for it for. Elena raised an eyebrow. Think about it. Wilson continued. Drake's a decorated Marine with an exemplary service record. Aggressive, yes. Old-fashioned in his views, certainly. But he's never been one to break protocol so blatantly. This feels like someone is applying pressure. You think he's working for someone else? Wilson shook his head. Not necessarily working for, but perhaps trying to impress or prove something to someone. We should look into his recent communications, see if there's a pattern. Elena nodded, already pulling up the base's internal network logs. I'll run a trace on his digital footprint. Be discreet, Wilson warned. If he is being manipulated, we don't want to spook whoever's behind it. For the next hour, Elena carefully examined Drake's digital trail through the base's systems. What she found was concerning. Multiple attempts to access classified files related to Operation Northern Guardian. Communications with an unknown external server using an encrypted VPN. Unusual file transfers during off hours. He's definitely up to something, Elena reported as Bennett joined them for the scheduled briefing. But I can't determine if he's acting alone or under orders. Bennett frowned. Drake's one of our best tactical operators. Hard to believe he'd compromise security. Wilson's expression darkened. I've seen it before. During the Cold War, the Soviets were masters at finding pressure points. Financial troubles, family issues, wounded pride. They'd exploit any vulnerability. Elena pulled up a map showing the Belgorod's position. There's something else you should see. The Russian submarine has maintained this exact position for nearly 48 hours. That's highly unusual for a vessel of this class. Bennett studied the display. Could they be experiencing mechanical problems? Unlikely, Elena replied. Their communications don't suggest any distress or operational issues. They're maintaining position deliberately. Wilson leaned closer to the screen. What's in that exact location? Anything strategic? Elena shook her head. Nothing obvious. It's international waters hundreds of miles from any significant infrastructure. Unless, Wilson's voice trailed off, his eyes narrowing in thought. Unless what? Bennett prompted. Unless the target isn't above the water but below it. Wilson pointed to the sea floor on the display. What's the underwater topography like there? Elena quickly overlaid a bathymetric map. Deep underwater canyon system. Drops off to about 3,000 meters in some places. Wilson nodded slowly. Perfect location for installing something undetected, something like a seabed sensor array or an acoustic monitoring system. Bennett looked alarmed. You think they're placing surveillance equipment that close to our territorial waters? It would be consistent with their historical tactics, Wilson confirmed. During the Cold War, we discovered several Soviet underwater listening posts near our naval bases. They were designed to track submarine movements, gather acoustic signatures, intercept communications. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard, running new analyses. If that's what they're doing, they'd need to communicate with whatever they're installing. Let me check for low-frequency transmissions in that spectral range. Within minutes, she had identified a pattern. There it is, periodic bursts of low-frequency transmissions consistent with underwater acoustic communications. They're definitely deploying something down there. Bennett's expression grew grave. If they're establishing a listening post at close to Alaskan waters, it represents a significant intelligence threat. We need to know exactly what they're deploying and how to neutralize it. I'll recalibrate our sensors to focus on those transmissions, Elena said. Given enough data, I should be able to determine the technical specifications of whatever they're installing. Bennett nodded. Do it. And Wilson, I want you to brief the tactical team on Cold War-era Russian underwater surveillance capabilities. If we need to mount a countermeasure operation, they'll need to know what they're dealing with. As the meeting concluded, Elena noticed a small anomaly in the security logs she'd been reviewing. Someone had attempted to access her quarters during the early morning hours while she was swimming. The digital lock had registered 3 failed entry attempts. She said nothing about this discovery to Bennett or Wilson. Instead, she made a mental note to install her own surveillance equipment when she returned to her quarters. If Drake or his men were escalating to physical intrusion, she wanted evidence. The pieces were aligning into a disturbing pattern. The Russian submarine's suspicious activity, Drake's increasingly aggressive behavior, the attempted breach of her quarters. Elena had spent her career identifying patterns in seemingly unrelated data points. Her instincts told her these events were connected, though the exact nature of that connection remained elusive. As she returned to her workstation, she mentally prepared for what was coming. Drake wouldn't stop after being publicly rebuffed. Men like him never did. When cornered, they either retreated or escalated dramatically. Based on his profile, Elena calculated the probability of escalation at over 80%, which meant she needed to be ready when it came. The next 2 days brought a deceptive calm. Drake and his team maintained their distance, focusing on tactical drills and equipment preparation. Elena continued her analysis of the Russian communications, gradually building a clearer picture of their underwater activities. The Belgorod was indeed deploying some kind of seabed installation. Acoustic signatures indicated mechanical arms operating at depth, placing objects on the ocean floor at precise intervals. The transmissions between the submarine and these devices used an encryption protocol she hadn't seen before, a hybrid of old Soviet methods and modern techniques. They're creating a network, Elena explained to Bennett and Wilson during their evening briefing. Each device communicates with the others, forming a mesh that can triangulate any vessel passing overhead. Bennett studied the simulation she had created. Coverage area. Based on the current deployment pattern, they could monitor approximately 60% of the sea lanes approaching Alaska, including the routes our ballistic missile submarines typically use when deploying to the Pacific. Wilson's expression darkened. That's the real target, our Ohio-class submarines. If they can track them leaving port, they could potentially follow them to their patrol areas. Exactly, Elena confirmed. But there's something else. These devices aren't just passive listeners. They're transmitting periodic signals back to a central receiver, likely on Russian territory. What kind of signals? Bennett asked. Elena displayed a frequency analysis. That's what concerns me. The pattern suggests they have sensor capabilities beyond simple acoustics. They may be able to detect specific vessel signatures, possibly even the unique radiation emissions from our nuclear submarines. The implications hung heavy in the air. If the Russians had developed technology that could reliably track America's ballistic missile submarine force, it would undermine a critical component of the nuclear deterrent. We need to neutralize this network, Bennett decided. Wilson, start planning a covert operation. We'll need to destroy or disable these devices without alerting the Russians that we've discovered them. Elena raised a hand. There's something else you should know. I've detected anomalies in our internal communication system. Specific transmissions related to Operation Northern Guardian are being copied to an unauthorized location. Bennett straightened. You're saying we have a security breach? Yes, Elena confirmed. Someone within this facility is monitoring our communications and potentially sharing that information externally. Wilson's eyes narrowed. Drake. I don't have definitive proof yet, Elena replied carefully, but the access patterns align with his duty schedule and system permissions. Bennett looked troubled. That's a serious accusation, Commander. Drake is a decorated Marine with an exemplary record. I understand that, Elena acknowledged, which is why I'm gathering more evidence before making any formal report. But in the meantime, I suggest we implement additional security protocols for all Northern Guardian communications. Bennett nodded slowly. Agreed. Set up a secure channel using your encryption system. Limited access, just the three of us for now. As they left the briefing room, Wilson fell into step beside Elena. You think Drake is our leak, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. The evidence points in that direction, she replied, but I'm not convinced he's acting alone or even fully aware of what he's doing. Wilson raised an eyebrow. His technical skills are limited, Elena explained. The data extraction method being used requires sophisticated knowledge of network architecture. Either Drake has hidden talents or someone is using him as a front, using his access credentials while he's conveniently looking the other way. Elena nodded, possibly, or manipulating him into taking actions that serve their purpose without him understanding the full implications. Wilson considered this as they walked. I've seen it before. During the Cold War, the Soviets were masters at running false flag operations. They'd manipulate people into believing they were serving one cause when they were actually serving another. My thoughts exactly, Elena agreed, which is why I'm proceeding carefully. If Drake is being manipulated, confronting him directly could alert whoever's behind this. They reached a junction in the corridor. Wilson paused, glancing around to ensure they were alone. Be careful, Reyes. If you're right about this, you're potentially dealing with a sophisticated intelligence operation. And in my experience, when these things start to unravel, they often get messy very quickly. Elena nodded once. I've been in messy situations before, Master Chief. A hint of a smile crossed Wilson's weathered face. Yes, I suppose you have. Later that evening, Elena worked alone in the skiff, running deeper analyses of the base's security systems. She had discovered something troubling. Subtle modifications to the surveillance camera network that created periodic blind spots in coverage. For approximately 3.5 seconds, every 15 minutes, cameras in certain corridors would freeze, creating a window where movement wouldn't be recorded. It was an elegant hack nearly impossible to detect unless you were specifically looking for it. Elena only found it because she had been systematically examining every potential vulnerability in the base's security infrastructure. A notification flashed on her tablet. One of the motion sensors she had discreetly placed outside her quarters had been triggered. Someone was at her door again. Elena quickly pulled up the corridor feed, but as she suspected, it showed nothing unusual. The camera had been compromised. She switched to a secondary system, a small personal camera she had hidden in a ventilation duct across from her quarters. The infrared image clearly showed two figures outside her door. Even with the low resolution, she could identify them as Martinez and Miller. They appeared to be trying to bypass the electronic lock using what looked like a specialized decryption device. Elena watched calmly as they worked. After 3 failed attempts, they abandoned the effort and moved quickly down the corridor, disappearing from view. Rather than anger, she felt a cold, analytical certainty. The pattern was accelerating. First, verbal harassment, then unauthorized access attempts to her systems, now physical intrusion. Each escalation provided more evidence, more links in the chain she was carefully constructing. She saved the footage and returned to her analysis of the Russian communications. The two issues, Drake's increasingly suspicious behavior and the Russian submarines' activities, continued to orbit each other in her mind like binary stars connected by an invisible but powerful gravity. The question was no longer if there was a connection, but what exactly that connection entailed. And as Elena processed the incoming signal data, a troubling possibility began to take shape. What if Drake's actions weren't just about personal resentment or professional jealousy? What if his targeting of her was specifically aimed at disrupting her analysis of the Russian operation? It was a hypothesis that required testing. Elena quickly devised a plan to create a controlled information leak, a piece of falsified intelligence about the Russian submarine that would be visible only to someone using Drake's access credentials. If that specific information found its way back to the Russians, it would confirm both the leak and the connection. As midnight approached, Elena finalized her trap and prepared to leave the skiff. She carefully backed up all her evidence to an encrypted drive and secured it in a hidden compartment of her tactical vest. Years of operating in hostile environments had taught her to always maintain contingency plans. Tomorrow would bring the next phase. She would present her findings on the Russian underwater network to Bennett and recommend immediate countermeasures. That would force whoever was behind the leak to either accept the loss of their surveillance system or take more drastic action to prevent it. Either way, the invisible chess match would move toward its endgame. The morning brought heavy rain drumming against the operations center's reinforced windows like distant gunfire. Elena had been at her station since 0400, tracking a new development. The Belgorod had begun transmitting a series of coded messages on a frequency normally reserved for Russian naval emergencies. "It's a deception," she explained to Bennett and Wilson as they arrived for the early briefing. "They're using an emergency channel to mask routine communications. It's meant to discourage interception. Most intelligence agencies would avoid monitoring emergency frequencies to prevent diplomatic incidents." Bennett studied the scrolling data. "But you monitored it anyway." A slight smile crossed Elena's face. "Let's just say I've learned to be thorough." "What are they saying?" Wilson asked. Elena highlighted sections of the decrypted text. "They're discussing a calibration event scheduled for 0600 tomorrow. Based on the technical parameters mentioned, I believe they're planning to activate their underwater network for full operational testing." Bennett frowned. "That's soon. I thought we had more time." "They're accelerating the timeline," Elena confirmed, "which suggests they either achieve their objectives faster than anticipated or they're concerned about detection." Wilson leaned closer to the display. "What's this repeated reference to Northern Lights Protocol?" "Unknown," Elena admitted. "It's not in any of our databases of Russian operational terminology, but the context suggests it's the activation sequence for the network." Bennett straightened. "Decision made. We need to move quickly. If that network goes active, it could compromise our submarine operations throughout the Pacific." "I've prepared a countermeasure plan," Elena said, bringing up a new display. "We can deploy autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with specialized jamming equipment. They won't destroy the Russian devices, but they can effectively blind them, preventing accurate detection." "How soon can we deploy?" Bennett asked. "The equipment is ready. We can launch within 6 hours." Bennett nodded. "Do it. Wilson, brief your tactical team on emergency extraction protocols in case things go sideways." He turned back to Elena. "In the security breach." "Still gathering evidence," she replied carefully, "but I've implemented a controlled leak to help identify the source." "Good. Keep me updated." Bennett checked his watch. "I need to brief Admiral Harrington. He'll want to know we're initiating countermeasures." After Bennett left, Wilson studied Elena's expression. "You're holding something back." She hesitated, then nodded once. "I believe the security breach and the Russian operation are connected. The timing of Drake's interference with my work aligns too perfectly with critical developments in the Russian activities." Wilson's eyes narrowed. "You think Drake is working for the Russians?" "Not necessarily directly," Elena clarified. "But I believe someone is using him to disrupt our monitoring of the Belgorod. His attempts to access my systems increased significantly whenever I made progress analyzing the underwater network." Wilson considered this. "It's plausible, but Drake doesn't strike me as a traitor." "I don't think he is, at least not intentionally." Elena pulled up personnel files. "I've been researching his background. 3 months ago, he was passed over for promotion to Master Gunnery Sergeant. Around the same time, he began experiencing financial difficulties. His wife required specialized medical treatment not fully covered by military insurance." Understanding dawned in Wilson's eyes. "Pressure points." "Exactly. Classic intelligence recruitment tactics. Find someone with access who's experiencing personal difficulties. Offer solutions. Gradually increase the requests until they're compromised beyond extraction." Wilson shook his head slowly. "If you're right, this goes well beyond Drake. We're talking about a sophisticated Russian intelligence operation with assets inside a high-security naval facility. Yes, Elena agreed, which is why I've been proceeding carefully. Whoever is running this has gone to great lengths to establish their network. If we move too quickly, we risk alerting them before we've identified all the players. Wilson's weathered face set in grim lines. But we're out of time. If the countermeasure operation launches tomorrow, they'll know we've discovered their underwater network. Which means they'll likely take action today, Elena concluded, either to stop our operation or to extract their assets. The old warrior nodded. Be on your guard. If Drake is involved, even unwittingly, he could become dangerous when cornered. Elena spent the next several hours preparing the underwater countermeasures while monitoring the security systems for any unusual activity. Drake and his team had been unusually quiet, which only increased her suspicion. In her experience, predators were often most silent just before they struck. At 1800 hours, her trap produced results. The falsified intelligence she had planted, suggesting the U.S. was unaware of the true purpose of the Russian underwater devices, was accessed using Drake's credentials. 30 minutes later, a burst transmission was sent from the base to an encrypted external server using an ingeniously disguised protocol that masked itself as routine system updates. Elena immediately documented the transmission and began tracing its destination. The signal bounced through multiple proxies, but she had anticipated this. Her specialized tracking software followed the digital breadcrumbs, gradually narrowing down the final destination. The results confirmed her suspicions. The transmission had ultimately reached a server in Vladivostok, a known hub for Russian naval intelligence operations. She was preparing to take her findings to Bennett when her system flagged an urgent alert. Someone was accessing the deployment plans for tomorrow's countermeasure operation, not just viewing them, but actively modifying parameters. Elena quickly traced the access. It was coming from a terminal in the tactical planning room, where Drake's team had been conducting mission preparations all day. Without hesitation, she initiated emergency security protocols, locking down the classified systems network-wide. Then she contacted Bennett. We have confirmation of the security breach, she reported tersely. Someone is actively tampering with the countermeasure deployment plans. I've locked down the systems, but the damage may already be done. Where? Bennett demanded. Tactical planning room. Drake's team has been there all day. I'll meet you there. And Elena, be careful. She ended the call and immediately checked the security camera feed. The tactical planning room appeared empty, but given the compromised surveillance system, she couldn't trust what she was seeing. Elena retrieved her sidearm from the secure locker and verified it was loaded. She rarely carried a weapon on base, but instincts honed through years of covert operations were screaming warnings she couldn't ignore. The corridors were quiet as she made her way toward the tactical planning room. Too quiet. The normal evening bustle of the operations center had diminished, as if personnel had been cleared from the area. She approached the room cautiously, noting that the security keypad beside the door showed signs of tampering. Drawing her weapon, Elena positioned herself to the side of the doorway and tried her access code. The door unlocked with a soft click. Using tactical room-clearing techniques drilled into her during SEAL training, Elena entered in a low-crouch weapon at the ready. The room appeared empty, but the main computer terminal was active screens displaying the deployment plans for tomorrow's operation. She approached, carefully scanning for any signs of tampering or explosive devices. The plans had indeed been modified. The deployment coordinates had been shifted by approximately 10 nautical miles, which would place the jamming vehicles outside the effective range of the Russian underwater network. Elena quickly corrected the coordinates and secured the system with her highest level encryption. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small object on the floor near the door. A communication earpiece, military issue still warm from recent use. Someone had left in a hurry. She was examining the device when her instincts triggered a warning. A faint sound, the shuffle of a boot on carpet, came from the corridor outside. Elena moved instantly, positioning herself beside the doorway, weapon ready. The tactical planning room had only one entrance, making it a potential trap. She activated the small body camera clipped to her uniform and waited. Footsteps approached, multiple sets moving with the coordinated rhythm of military training. Then a voice, Drake's voice, just outside the door. Commander Reyes, are you in there? We need to talk. Elena remained silent, calculating odds and options. Commander, we know you're in there. The security system logged your entry. This doesn't have to get complicated. We just need to have a conversation about some misunderstandings. The false friendliness in his tone confirmed her suspicions. Whatever was about to happen, it wouldn't be a conversation. Elena made her decision. Rather than wait to be cornered, she would control the engagement. "I'll be right out. Gunnery Sergeant," she called, simultaneously sending a quick text alert to Wilson with her location and the simple message, "Drake, confrontation imminent." Taking a deep breath, Elena holstered her weapon. Drawing on the man now would escalate the situation beyond recovery, potentially destroying any chance of identifying whoever was behind him. Instead, she would use the one advantage they didn't expect, her specialized training. She opened the door to find Drake standing in the corridor, flanked by Martinez and Miller. All three were the smug expressions of men who believed they held overwhelming advantage. "Evening, Commander," Drake said, his voice carrying deliberate menace. "Let's have that talk now." The corridor stretched empty in both directions, the overhead lights casting harsh shadows across Drake's face. Elena noted the positions of all three men. Drake directly in front of her, Martinez slightly to his right, Miller hanging back near the corner. Their positioning was tactical, designed to block both potential escape routes. "What can I help you with, Gunnery Sergeant?" Elena kept her voice calm, professional. Drake stepped closer, invading her personal space. At 6'3", he towered over her 5'4" frame, using his size to intimidate. "You've been poking around in restricted systems," he said, "accessing personnel files, monitoring communications, interfering with tactical planning. That's grounds for serious disciplinary action." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I've been conducting security monitoring as authorized by Commander Bennett. If you have concerns about my activities, I suggest you take them up with him." Drake's expression hardened. "Bennett isn't here right now. It's just us having this conversation." Martinez moved to block the corridor behind her. Miller remained at the corner, watching for any approaching personnel. "Look who we have here," Drake continued, voice dropping to a menacing growl. "The Navy's pet project. All that top-level clearance, and what do they send us? A computer jockey who probably gets a nosebleed climbing a flight of stairs." Martinez snickered. "Heard she's some kind of signals wizard, supposed to be integrating the new comms package." "Signals wizard?" Drake scoffed, the words dripping with disdain. He looked directly at Elena. "You know what we used to call signals wizards? Nerds. Backroom boys. People who made sure the real warriors could talk to each other while they did the work." Elena remained motionless, her expression revealing nothing. She registered their presence in words as she would register a change in atmospheric pressure, data points to be noted but not reacted to. Drake's frustration grew in the vacuum of her silence. He craved a reaction, a spark of fear or anger that would validate his dominance. He got nothing. "You know the word is, you came from the teams," Drake said, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial roar. "That's a good one, a real good one. They letting 5'0" computer jockeys wear the trident now. What a joke. The whole program's gone soft." Miller, emboldened, chimed in. "Soft is right, Gunny. All this high-tech garbage, drones and satellites, they're trying to take the fight out of the man. It's why we're losing our edge." "Exactly," Drake boomed, straightening up. He pointed a thick finger at Elena's still averted head. "This is the problem, this right here. They think a line of code is a substitute for a burst from a rifle. They think a good signal means more than a good man with a bayonet." He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping the now silent corridor. "You ask me, SEALs are worth nothing anymore. Nothing." Drake stepped even closer, his face inches from hers. His hands shot out, grabbing her by the throat and pushing her against the wall. The move was deliberately intimidating rather than immediately harmful, a display of physical dominance. "What you need to understand," he growled, "is that you're in over your head. Some things are bigger than your security clearance, bigger than your fancy computer systems." Elena felt the pressure on her throat increase slightly. Her mind remained perfectly clear, calculating angles, distances, vulnerabilities. She had allowed this physical contact for one reason only: to ensure the body camera captured irrefutable evidence of assault. "I suggest you remove your hand, Gunnery Sergeant," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the pressure on her larynx. Drake laughed, looking back at his companions. "Or what? You'll write me up, file a complaint. We all know how that would go." Your word against 3 decorated combat veterans. Elena's eyes, which had been focused on a point past Drake's shoulder, now shifted to meet his directly. Last chance, she said, her voice carrying a subtle note that made Martinez shift uncomfortably. Remove your hand and walk away. Something in her tone gave Drake pause, but his pride wouldn't allow him to back down in front of his men. His grip tightened. Maybe you didn't hear me clearly. SEALs like you are worth nothing. That was the moment. The final line crossed the evidence secured. Elena made her move. What happened next occurred so quickly that Martinez and Miller would later struggle to describe it coherently. Elena's right hand came up in a precise arc, her first 2 fingers extended in a specialized strike that targeted the nerve cluster where Drake's thumb met his wrist. The effect was instantaneous. His hand sprang open involuntarily, nerve signals screaming pain up his arm. Simultaneously, Elena pivoted her body using Drake's own forward momentum to pull him off balance. As he stumbled forward, she executed a textbook joint manipulation, capturing his now useless right arm and applying pressure to the radial nerve. With minimal effort, she redirected his considerable mass, sending him crashing into Martinez. Miller, reacting on instinct, lunged forward to grab her. Elena had already anticipated this move. She stepped inside his reach, a counterintuitive tactic that caught him completely unprepared. Her left hand shot out in a precise strike to the brachial plexus nerve cluster, just below his collarbone. The impact was minimal, almost silent, but the effect was devastating. Miller's arm went instantly numb, the neural pathways temporarily overloaded. His forward momentum carried him stumbling past her as he clutched at his deadened limb. Drake, having collided with Martinez, was now struggling to regain his balance. Elena completed her sequence with a controlled push that sent Drake fully into Martinez, causing both men to tumble to the floor in an undignified heap. In the span of approximately 9 seconds, Elena had neutralized 3 trained Marines without throwing a single punch or raising her voice. She now stood in the center of the corridor, her stance balanced, in ready breathing, even and controlled. Drake looked up at her from the floor, his expression a mixture of pain, shock, and disbelief. Martinez was trying to untangle himself from his superior officer. Miller was pressed against the wall, still trying to will feeling back into his arm. Elena regarded them calmly. The conversation is concluded, she said, her voice quiet yet carrying absolute finality. A slow clap echoed from the far end of the corridor. Master Chief Wilson stood watching, his weathered face bearing a small, satisfied smile. Quite the discussion you folks are having, he observed dryly. Gunnery Sergeant, your men appear to be experiencing some difficulty. Perhaps you should report to medical. Drake struggled to his feet, his face flushed with humiliation. This isn't over, he growled at Elena. Wilson stepped forward. Actually, I believe it is. Commander Bennett is waiting for all of us in his office, now. Drake hesitated, clearly calculating his options. Finding none favorable, he nodded stiffly to his men, and they began moving toward the operations center, Drake cradling his still tingling arm. As they departed, Wilson moved beside Elena. Impressive restraint, he said quietly. You could have done much worse. That wasn't the objective, she replied. Wilson nodded, understanding. You got what you needed. Elena tapped the small camera on her uniform. Every word, every action. Good, because I think we're about to discover exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. Commander Bennett's office was a testament to naval tradition. Model ships in glass cases framed photographs of aircraft carriers and submarines, and the distinctive array of ribbons and medals displayed in a shadow box on the wall. It was the domain of a career officer who had risen through the ranks on merit and dedication. Now that office had become an impromptu tribunal. Bennett sat behind his desk, his expression grave as he reviewed the security footage playing on his monitor. Beside him stood Colonel James Harrison, the base's executive officer, a Marine whose ramrod posture and piercing gaze had intimidated generations of junior officers. Elena sat to one side, her posture perfect, hands resting lightly on her knees. Across from her, Drake and his men stood at attention, their faces masks of controlled defiance. Wilson stood by the door, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with the quiet intensity of a man who had seen similar scenes unfold many times before. Bennett finished the video and looked up. Would anyone care to explain what I just witnessed? Drake stepped forward. Sir, my team was conducting a security check on suspicious activities. Commander Reyes became agitated and attacked us without provocation. Elena remained silent, her expression unchanged. Bennett's eyebrow rose slightly. That's your statement, Gunnery Sergeant? That's what happened, and... Yes, sir. Drake's voice carried the confidence of a man accustomed to being believed. Bennett glanced at Martinez and Miller. Do you two corroborate this account? Both Marines nodded firmly. Yes, sir, they replied in unison. I see. Bennett tapped a key on his computer. Colonel Harrison, would you care to review the evidence? The colonel stepped forward, watching as Bennett replayed the corridor footage. This time the video included audio. You ask me, SEALs are worth nothing anymore. Nothing. They all watched as Drake grabbed Elena by the throat, pushing her against the wall. The subsequent neutralization of all three Marines played out in stark clarity. When the video ended, Harrison's face had darkened considerably. Gunnery Sergeant, do you still maintain that Commander Reyes attacked without provocation? Drake shifted uncomfortably. Sir, that footage doesn't show the full context of... Answer the question, Harrison interrupted, his voice razor sharp. Drake stiffened. No, sir. And do you acknowledge that you physically assaulted a superior officer? A muscle twitched in Drake's jaw. Yes, sir. Harrison turned to Elena. Commander Reyes, do you wish to make a statement? Elena met his gaze. The footage speaks for itself, Colonel. Bennett leaned forward. Actually, Commander, there's more to discuss than just this incident. He turned to Wilson. Master Chief, please secure the room. Wilson nodded and activated the office's security protocols. The windows automatically tinted to opacity, and a soft hum indicated the activation of anti-surveillance measures. Bennett looked directly at Drake. Gunnery Sergeant, we have evidence that your security credentials have been used to access classified information related to Operation Northern Guardian and transmit that information to an external server in Vladivostok. The blood drained from Drake's face. Sir, I never... Whether you did so knowingly or were manipulated is what we're trying to determine, Bennett continued, but the evidence is irrefutable. Your access codes were used and information was compromised. Harrison stepped closer to Drake. This goes far beyond assault, Gunnery Sergeant. We're talking about potential treason. Drake's composure cracked. Colonel, I would never. I'm no traitor. I've bled for this country. Then explain, Harrison demanded, why your security credentials were used to access classified operational plans and transmit them to Russian intelligence. Drake looked genuinely bewildered. I don't know how that's possible. I've never shared my access codes with anyone. Elena spoke for the first time. You wouldn't need to share them, Gunnery Sergeant. Someone with physical access to your workstation could have installed a keylogger to capture your credentials when you logged in. Drake's eyes darted to her, then back to Bennett. Sir, I swear I had no knowledge of any breach. Bennett studied him carefully. Who has had access to your workstation in the past month? Drake thought for a moment. My team, obviously. The IT support staff during routine maintenance. And, he hesitated. And, Harrison prompted, Dr. Natalie Carson from Systems Integration. She installed some new software for our tactical planning system about 3 weeks ago. Bennett and Wilson exchanged glances. Carson wasn't scheduled to perform any installations, Bennett said quietly. Elena was already pulling up personnel files on her tablet. Dr. Natalie Carson, Systems Integration Specialist, transferred from Naval Research Labs 6 months ago. She scrolled through the file. Security clearance verified by Naval Intelligence. All credentials appear in order. Too perfect, Wilson murmured. Classic deep cover insertion. Bennett turned to Elena. Can you access her file metadata check when the record was created and by whom? Elena's fingers moved across the screen. The file was created 8 months ago. The authorizing officer was... Her eyes widened slightly. Admiral James Kelso. Kelso retired 10 months ago, Harrison said, alarm evident in his voice. Wilson nodded grimly, which means someone used his credentials after his retirement to create a false personnel file. Drake looked stricken. Are you saying Dr. Carson is a Russian intelligence officer, Elena finished. Most likely GRU given the sophistication of the operation. Bennett was already reaching for his secure phone. We need to locate Carson immediately and place her in custody. Sir, Elena interrupted, if we move on Carson now, we risk alerting whoever else might be involved in this operation. This level of infiltration suggests she's not working alone. Wilson nodded agreement. Commander Reyes is right. This bears all the hallmarks of a coordinated intelligence operation. Carson may just be one part of a larger network. Bennett considered this, then nodded. What do you propose, Commander? We feed Carson false information through Drake's credentials, Elena explained. Make her believe the countermeasures operation has been delayed due to technical issues. That should buy us time to identify her contacts and communication methods. Harrison looked skeptical. And what makes you think she'll believe that? Because it will come from a source she trusts, Elena replied, looking at Drake. Someone she's successfully manipulated before. Drake's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You want me to help trap her? Unless you prefer being court-martialed for treason, Harrison said bluntly. Drake straightened. I'll do whatever it takes to clear my name, sir. Bennett nodded. Good. Wilson, coordinate with base security to establish discreet surveillance on Carson. Elena, prepare the false information package. Drake, you and your team are confined to quarters except when directly involved in this counterintelligence operation. As the meeting concluded, Elena gathered her materials. Drake approached her, his earlier bravado replaced by a complex mixture of resentment and grudging respect. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I never intended to compromise operational security. Elena met his gaze evenly. Intentions don't matter much in our line of work, Gunnery Sergeant. Only results. Drake nodded stiffly and turned to leave, then paused. How did you know about Carson, about the security breach, all of it? A hint of a smile touched Elena's lips. Because it's my job to see patterns others miss, just as it's your job to act when those patterns reveal a threat. Drake held her gaze for a long moment, then departed without another word. Wilson approached as the room emptied. You handled that well. Drake could still be useful if his ego doesn't get in the way. He'll cooperate, Elena said confidently. His pride is wounded, but his sense of duty is stronger. More importantly, he's angry at being manipulated. Wilson smiled slightly. Hell hath no fury like a Marine who discovers he's been played. As they left Bennett's office, Elena's mind was already racing ahead, mapping out the complex counterintelligence operation they would need to execute. The pieces were falling into place, but the most dangerous phase was yet to come. The trap was set with meticulous precision. For 3 days, Elena orchestrated a careful dance of misinformation and surveillance. Using Drake's credentials, they fed Carson carefully crafted intelligence, suggesting the countermeasures operation had been delayed due to technical failures. Simultaneously, they monitored every system she accessed, every communication she sent, gradually building a complete picture of her activities. The pattern that emerged confirmed Elena's suspicions. Carson wasn't just gathering intelligence, she was actively sabotaging the Northern Guardian operation to protect the Russian underwater network. She's modified the guidance systems for our underwater drones, Elena explained during their secure briefing. The alterations are subtle, slight calibration errors that would cause the drones to miss their targets by several hundred meters. Bennett frowned. How did she gain access to the drone systems that's completely outside her authorized areas? She didn't access them directly, Elena replied, bringing up system logs on the display. She inserted a corrupted software update into the routine maintenance cycle. Most of the technicians wouldn't notice the discrepancies unless they were specifically looking for them. Wilson studied the data. Classic sabotage technique. Small changes with big consequences, hidden within legitimate updates. Exactly. Elena highlighted a particular section of code. And here's the signature component, a specific error pattern that matches known GRU cyber operations. It's virtually identical to code found in attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure systems last year. Drake, who had been silently observing, leaned forward. What's her endgame? She has to know we'll detect these problems eventually. Elena nodded. That's what concerns me. The timeline suggests she's only trying to delay our countermeasures by 48-72 hours. That means whatever the Russians are planning with their underwater network is imminent. Bennett's expression darkened. We need to move on Carson now before she can do any more damage or alert her handlers. Agreed, Elena said, but we should coordinate the arrest with our countermeasure deployment. If we time it correctly, we can neutralize both threats simultaneously. The plan was approved. Base security would apprehend Carson during her morning shift, while Elena and Wilson would lead the accelerated deployment of the underwater countermeasures. Everything was in place for the following morning, but as Elena had learned through bitter experience, Even the most meticulously crafted plans rarely survive first contact with the enemy. At 0200 hours, the base alarm system activated. Security breach in the main server room. Elena was already awake reviewing final deployment protocols when the alert came through her secure tablet. She immediately accessed the security camera feeds but found them offline, another system failure that couldn't be coincidental. She contacted Wilson and Bennett, then grabbed her sidearm and headed directly for the server room. As she moved through the darkened corridors, the emergency lighting casting everything in a red glow, she noted the unusual absence of security personnel. Something had drawn them elsewhere, a diversionary tactic. Elena approached the server room, cautiously weapon-ready. The door was ajar, a sliver of blue light spilling into the corridor. She could hear the rapid click of keyboard strokes from within. Using the reflection in her tactical flashlight, Elena peered around the doorframe. Carson was inside working furiously at the main console, but she wasn't alone. Martinez stood beside her, weapon drawn, watching the door. This was an unexpected complication. Elena had suspected Carson might have additional assets, but Martinez's involvement suggested a deeper infiltration than they had realized. She needed to act quickly. The server room contained access to all of Northern Guardian's operational systems. Whatever Carson was doing could potentially compromise not just their countermeasures, but the entire Pacific submarine fleet. Elena weighed her options. Direct confrontation would be risky with Martinez armed and on alert, but waiting for backup might allow Carson to complete whatever she was attempting. The decision was made for her when Martinez glanced at his watch and spoke urgently to Carson. 2 minutes, then we need to move. Carson nodded without looking up. Almost there, the system is fighting me. Elena made her move. Utilizing the advanced close-quarters combat techniques drilled into her during SEAL training, she entered the room in a low crouch, weapon trained on Martinez. Federal agents' hands where I can see them. Martinez spun, raising his weapon instinctively. Elena didn't hesitate. Her first shot struck his shoulder, spinning him backward. The second hit his hand, causing him to drop his gun with a cry of pain. Carson abandoned the keyboard and reached for something in her jacket. Elena shifted her aim. Don't! The woman froze, then slowly raised her hands. Her features, previously friendly and unremarkable, had transformed into a mask of cold calculation. You're too late, Carson said calmly. The protocols are already in place. Step away from the console, Elena ordered, keeping her weapon trained on Carson while maintaining awareness of Martinez, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder. The door behind her opened. Elena tensed, but it was Wilson and Bennett with security personnel close behind. Clear, Elena reported as the security team secured Martinez and Carson. Bennett moved immediately to the console. What was she doing? Elena holstered her weapon and took his place at the keyboard. Her fingers flew across the keys, rapidly assessing the system status. What she found sent a chill through her. She was initiating a complete system purge, Elena explained, and simultaneously uploading a command sequence to the Russian underwater network. Wilson leaned closer. What kind of command sequence? Elena's expression grew grave. Activation codes. The network isn't just for surveillance. Those devices have offensive capabilities. Bennett's face paled. What kind of offensive capabilities? Based on these parameters, Elena said, examining the code, they appear to be designed to generate targeted electromagnetic pulses. If activated near a submarine's communication arrays, they could potentially disable critical systems. The implications hung heavy in the air. Such devices could render American submarines vulnerable, unable to communicate or navigate properly. Can you stop the activation? Bennett asked urgently. Elena was already working. I've blocked the command transmission, but I can't tell if it was completed before I interrupted it. We need to deploy our countermeasures immediately. Bennett nodded. Make it happen. Wilson, coordinate with Admiral Harrington. We need to alert all Pacific Fleet submarines about this threat. As security led Carson and Martinez away, the woman looked back at Elena with cold eyes. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Commander. This goes far beyond a few underwater devices. Elena held her gaze steadily. Then why don't you enlighten us, Doctor? Or should I call you Major? Your GRU rank, I presume. A flicker of surprise crossed Carson's face. Yes, we know who you are, Elena continued. Natalia Petrova, GRU Foreign Intelligence Directorate. You've been operating under various covers for at least 8 years. This time, Carson couldn't hide her shock. How could you possibly? Because while you were watching us, we were watching you, Elena replied calmly. Your operational patterns match those from 3 previous GRU infiltrations, including the Bremerton Naval Base incident in 2018. It was a calculated bluff, but it hit home. Carson's composure cracked momentarily. Take them to the secure holding facility, Bennett ordered. Full isolation protocols. As they were led away, Wilson turned to Elena with raised eyebrows. Bremerton incident. A slight smile touched her lips. There wasn't one, but she didn't know that. Wilson chuckled. Psychological warfare. Well played. Elena returned to the console. We're not done yet. The activation signal was partially transmitted. We need to deploy our countermeasures immediately and alert all submarines in the region. Bennett was already on the secure line to Pacific Fleet Command. This is going to be a long night. For the next several hours, Elena coordinated the emergency deployment of the underwater countermeasure drones. The original plan had called for a careful, stealthy approach. Now they were racing against time, sacrificing stealth for speed. By 0600, the first reports came in. The countermeasure drones had reached their targets and begun jamming the Russian devices. Submarines throughout the Pacific had been alerted and were taking evasive actions, changing depths and courses to avoid potential threats. Elena monitored the operations from the command center, her focus absolute. This was the environment where she thrived: crisis management, rapid decision-making, seeing patterns in chaos. At 0730, the first confirmation arrived. The Russian underwater network had attempted to activate, but the jamming had been successful. The electromagnetic pulses had fired harmlessly into empty water, missing their targets. Bennett approached as Elena reviewed the latest data. Good work, Commander. You've prevented what could have been a catastrophic compromise of our submarine capabilities. Elena nodded, still focused on the monitors. The immediate threat is neutralized, but the Belgorod is still out there, and we need to determine how deep this infiltration goes. Martinez is talking, Bennett reported. Carson recruited him 3 months ago, played on his financial problems and resentment over being passed over for promotion. Classic manipulation. And Drake, Elena asked. Completely in the dark. Carson used his credentials without his knowledge. She installed a keylogger on his system during one of their routine maintenance visits. Elena nodded. This aligned with her assessment. Drake had been arrogant and hostile, but not treasonous. Wilson joined them, looking grim. We just received word from Naval Intelligence. They've identified 3 more potential Russian assets at other bases. This was a coordinated operation targeting our entire Pacific submarine fleet. Bennett shook his head in disbelief. How did we miss this? Because they used old techniques in new packaging, Elena explained. The winter protocol Carson was using dates back to the Cold War. Most modern security systems aren't designed to look for such outdated methods. But you recognized it, Bennett observed. Elena glanced at Wilson. I had help from someone who'd seen it before. Wilson smiled slightly. Sometimes the old dogs remember the old tricks. As the crisis response continued, Elena took a moment to check on Drake. He had been cleared of direct involvement, but was still confined to quarters pending a full investigation. She found him sitting on the edge of his bunk, staring at the wall. He looked up as she entered, his expression a complex mixture of anger, shame, and relief. Commander, he acknowledged stiffly. Gunnery Sergeant. Elena remained standing. I thought you should know that your security clearance has been provisionally restored. The investigation confirms you were not knowingly involved in Carson's operation. Drake nodded, his jaw tight. Small comfort knowing I was used like that I endangered the entire mission. We all have blind spots, Elena said quietly. The key is learning from them. Drake looked up at her, studying her face. How did you know about all of this? Because it's what I was trained to do, she replied simply, just as you were trained for your specialties. A long moment of silence stretched between them. Finally, Drake stood. I owe you an apology, Commander. My behavior was unacceptable. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. Elena nodded once, accepting his words. We all serve in different ways, Gunnery Sergeant. The uniform, not the role, is what unites us. Drake extended his hand. After a brief hesitation, Elena accepted it. It wasn't friendship, but it was a beginning. A recognition of mutual respect that had been hard-won through crisis and revelation. 2 days later, the base assembly hall was filled to capacity. Every available officer and enlisted person stood at attention as Colonel Harrison addressed the formation. Today we gather to address a serious breach of security and conduct unbecoming. Harrison began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. This command experienced an infiltration attempt by foreign intelligence services that threatened not only this base, but our entire Pacific Fleet. Elena stood with Bennett and Wilson to one side of the podium, her posture perfect, expression neutral. Across the hall, Drake stood with his unit, his face a mask of professional composure. Due to the quick actions and exceptional vigilance of certain personnel, this threat was identified and neutralized. Harrison continued. 2 individuals involved in this operation have been taken into custody and are facing charges of espionage and treason. A murmur ran through the assembled ranks. Harrison raised a hand for silence. In addition to the security breach, this command witnessed serious violations of military conduct in the chain of command. These violations will not be tolerated under any circumstances. Harrison turned slightly. Gunnery Sergeant Drake front and center. Drake marched forward, coming to attention before the colonel with a sharp salute. Gunnery Sergeant Drake, you have been found guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer, insubordination and physical assault against a superior officer. While the investigation has cleared you of knowingly participating in espionage activities, your actions created an environment that the enemy exploited. Drake stood, rigid eyes fixed forward. Yes, sir. Your punishment includes reduction in rank to staff sergeant, forfeiture of 2 months' pay, and reassignment to training duties. Furthermore, you will be removed from operational status for a minimum of 6 months pending reevaluation. Understood, sir. Harrison's voice hardened further. Additionally, you will publicly apologize to the officer you assaulted and demonstrate that you understand the seriousness of your actions. Drake swallowed hard but maintained his composure. Yes, sir. Harrison turned to Elena. Commander Reyes front and center. Elena moved forward with quiet precision, taking her place beside Drake and rendering a perfect salute to the colonel. Harrison returned her salute. Commander Reyes, this command owes you a debt of gratitude. Your diligence, expertise, and extraordinary professionalism prevented what could have been a catastrophic compromise of national security. Your actions exemplify the highest traditions of naval service. Thank you, sir, Elena replied simply. Harrison turned to Drake. Staff Sergeant Drake, you will now render a formal apology to Commander Reyes. Drake turned to face Elena. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a complex understanding that transcended words. Then Drake snapped to attention and rendered a crisp salute. Commander Reyes, I offer my sincere apology for my unprofessional and unacceptable conduct. My actions were inexcusable and reflected poorly on myself, the Marine Corps, and this command. I recognize the seriousness of my behavior and am committed to learning from this experience. Elena held his gaze for a moment, then returned his salute with equal precision. Apology accepted, Staff Sergeant. As they returned to their positions, Harrison addressed the assembled personnel once more. Let this serve as a reminder to all. We are one team with diverse skills and capabilities. Respect for each member's contribution is not optional. It is fundamental to our mission success. The formal proceedings concluded and the personnel were dismissed to their duties. As the crowd dispersed, Wilson approached Elena. Well, that's one way to change base culture, he observed dryly. Elena nodded. Public accountability matters. It sets the tone. Wilson studied her for a moment. You know, I've been thinking about Lieutenant Hayes, the intelligence officer I told you about from the Barents Sea operation. What about her? A smile crinkled the corners of Wilson's eyes. You remind me of her more than I initially realized. The same quiet competence, the same ability to see patterns others miss. Elena glanced at him curiously. You speak about her with unusual familiarity. Wilson's smile deepened. I should. Sharon Hayes was my wife for 38 years. She passed last spring. Elena's normally controlled expression registered genuine surprise. I didn't know. Few did. We kept our relationships separate from our professional lives. Different last names, different duty stations for most of our careers. Wilson looked out across the now empty assembly hall, but she was the finest intelligence officer I ever knew. She saved more lives than most people will ever realize, all while being underestimated because of her gender and role. He turned back to Elena. She would have appreciated what you did here, not just stopping the Russian operation, but the way you handled Drake and his team. Correction rather than destruction. Before Elena could respond, Bennett approached. Commander, we have an update on the Belgorod. It's on the move heading back toward Russian waters. Elena nodded immediately, shifting focus to the operational implications. They know their network has been compromised. They'll be adjusting their strategy. Which means we need to adjust ours, Bennett agreed. There's a briefing in 20 minutes. Admiral Harrington will be joining via secure video link. As Bennett departed, Wilson gave Elena a knowing look. Back to work then. The game never really ends, does it? No, Elena agreed quietly. It just evolves. The command center hummed with renewed purpose. On the main display, satellite imagery tracked the Belgorod's path back toward Russian territorial waters. Smaller screens monitored the status of the countermeasure drones and the neutralized underwater devices. Admiral Harrington's face occupied the central video screen, his expression grave but satisfied. Outstanding work, everyone. The containment of this threat represents one of the most significant counterintelligence victories in recent naval history. Bennett nodded acknowledgement. Thank you, Admiral. We were fortunate to identify the threat before it fully materialized. Fortune favors the prepared, Harrington replied. And speaking of preparation, we need to discuss next steps. The Russians won't abandon this strategy just because we foiled one attempt. They'll regroup, refine, and try again. Elena, who had been studying the tracking data, spoke up. Admiral, the Belgorod's retreat pattern suggests they're attempting to preserve operational security. They believe we've identified their underwater network, but not necessarily the full scope of their operation. Harrington leaned forward. Meaning this was likely a test run for a broader deployment, Elena explained. The devices we neutralized were sophisticated, but not at the cutting edge of Russian capabilities. They were expendable assets designed to evaluate our detection and response protocols. Wilson nodded agreement. Classic intelligence gathering through provocation. Force your adversary to reveal their defensive measures by presenting a limited threat. So what are they really planning? Bennett asked. Elena brought up a map of the Pacific seafloor. Based on the data we've gathered, I believe they're mapping potential locations for a more permanent underwater surveillance network. One that would cover not just the Alaskan approaches, but the entire northeastern Pacific. Harrington's expression darkened. That would give them unprecedented monitoring capabilities over our submarine operations. Yes, sir, Elena confirmed, and potentially the ability to track our Ohio-class submarines as they deploy from base. The implications hung heavy in the air. America's ballistic missile submarines represented a critical leg of the nuclear triad, their effectiveness dependent on their ability to operate undetected. Recommendations, Harrington prompted. Elena highlighted several areas on the map. We should establish our own monitoring network in these key locations, not just passive sensors, but active countermeasure systems that can detect and disable any Russian devices before they become operational. Wilson added, and we need to enhance our counterintelligence operations. Carson's infiltration suggests there may be other Russian assets we haven't identified yet. Harrington considered this. I agree on both counts. Commander Reyes, I want you to lead the technical development of this countermeasure network. Master Chief Wilson, you'll coordinate the counterintelligence effort with naval intelligence. Elena and Wilson acknowledged their assignments. One more thing, Harrington added. Commander Reyes, in recognition of your exceptional service in this operation, you're being promoted to the rank of captain, effective immediately. Congratulations. Elena maintained her professional composure, but a flicker of pride crossed her features. Thank you, Admiral. As the briefing concluded, the command center personnel returned to their duties with renewed focus. Elena remained at the central console, already mapping out the technical requirements for the new monitoring network. Wilson approached, a subtle smile on his weathered face. Congratulations, Captain. Well deserved. Elena nodded. Thank you, Master Chief. What's your next move? He asked. Elena's eyes remained on the display, studying the ocean depths, where invisible battles for information and advantage would continue to be fought. We adapt, she said simply. The Russians will change their approach based on what they learn from this operation. We need to anticipate those changes. Wilson nodded approvingly, always thinking 3 moves ahead. Sharon would have liked that about you. A subtle alarm chimed from one of the monitoring stations. Elena moved immediately to investigate, Wilson following close behind. What is it? He asked. Elena studied the incoming data, her expression focused. New acoustic signature detected near the Kamchatka Peninsula. Similar characteristics to the Belgorod, but with distinct differences. She brought up the analysis on the main screen. It's the Khabarovsk, Russia's newest submarine class. Even more advanced than the Belgorod, with enhanced capabilities for deep-sea operations. Wilson frowned. They're escalating. Yes, Elena agreed, and so must we. As alerts were sent and new monitoring protocols initiated, Elena felt a familiar clarity of purpose. This was her arena, the invisible battlefield of signals, patterns, and countermeasures. A domain where physical size and gender meant nothing compared to intellect, preparation, and will. Drake appeared at the entrance to the command center, his new staff sergeant insignia in place. He approached hesitantly, aware of his diminished status. "Captain," he acknowledged, noting her new rank. "Congratulations on the promotion." "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," Elena replied evenly. Drake cleared his throat. "I've been assigned to the security detail for the new monitoring system installation. Commander Bennett thought my tactical experience might be useful despite everything." Elena studied him for a moment. Everyone deserves a second chance to serve, Staff Sergeant, especially those who recognize their mistakes. A look of genuine gratitude crossed Drake's face. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't let the team down." As Drake departed, Wilson observed, "That's a significant change in attitude." "People can surprise you," Elena replied. "When there's perspective shifts." Wilson smiled. "Indeed they can. Speaking of surprises, I have something for you." He handed her a small, worn notebook bound in faded leather. "What's this?" Elena asked. "Sharon's field notes from the Barents Sea operation. Her observations on Soviet communication patterns, coding techniques, and operational methodologies." Wilson's eyes held a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Much of it never made it into the official reports, but it might give you insights into current Russian thinking. Their Naval Intelligence Division still employs many of the same foundational strategies. Elena accepted the notebook with appropriate reverence. "Thank you, Master Chief. This is invaluable." Wilson nodded. "Knowledge passed down. That's how we maintain our edge." As the command center continued its vigilant monitoring, Elena opened the notebook, finding pages of meticulous notes and observations written in a steady, precise hand. The insights of another woman who had fought invisible battles decades earlier, whose contributions had gone largely unrecognized but had saved countless lives. Elena felt a connection across time, a lineage of quiet professionals who served without acclaim or recognition, whose victories were measured not in medals or public accolades, but in threats averted and lives preserved. She turned to the monitoring station where the Russian submarine's signature pulsed steadily on the display. The game continued as it always had, evolving, but never truly ending. And she was ready for the next move, carrying forward the legacy of those who had come before, securing the future through vigilance, expertise, and unwavering resolve. In the gleaming technological heart of naval operations, Captain Elena Reyes continued her watch, invisible to most of the world, but essential to its safety. The true measure of worth wasn't in physical strength or loud declarations, but in the quiet competence that protected a nation from threats most would never know existed. It was enough. It was everything.